Yeah, all right, so it's week 4, it's Tuesday, and quick announcement, we're actually not having our section this week, we're canceling section. I know you guys will be really sad to hear that. I mean, frankly, just the reason is that we had some schedule conflicts and we just didn't have our exercises ready, so it's our fault, but I just I don't want to waste you guys' time, so if I don't have a good handout full of interesting problems for you to work on, I don't want to make you show up and work on something that I threw together in haste. So we'll just let everybody off the hook this week. So in terms of like the section points counting toward the total or whatever, this doesn't affect that. There isn't a section today to get points for or lose points for. So that just means the number of them at the end will be down by 1. But that's fine. I don't think that'll affect anything really. So yeah, don't go to section. If you have a friend who's not here in the room, maybe if you see them today, tell them don't go to section, because I think a few people still have not heard that announcement yet. I sent you guys an email. Did you see an email about no section? Yeah? Okay, another email, like we sent out homework 1 grades. Did you guys see email about that? Yeah? Okay, good, because I never know whether the emails arrive or sometimes they get stuck in spam filters or whatever. But if you didn't hear about your homework 1 score, please contact us. We will help you. You should have that. Our goal is going to be that you get your homework score back before the next assignment is due. Sometimes just like right before it's due, maybe the same day or the day before. We can't necessarily have a lot of gap between those 2 times, but we will try to make it so that if if you're turning in the next assignment and then you discover there was some mistake on the previous one, that you would be able to react to that feedback and fix it or something on the next one. Hopefully, that's going to be our goal. The other thing is that I have posted the 3rd homework assignment. It's up on the website right now. It went up yesterday. It's called Mad Libs. Now, if you took 106B with me, I give a Mad Libs assignment sometimes in 106B, so you might have already written a Mad Libs program in your life, and that's okay. I think a couple of the programs in this course I'm going to either revisit or do a new take on something that you might have seen before. That's okay whether you have or haven't seen it. I think that the challenge of writing this program does not come from whether you understand what Mad Libs are or whether you've thought about Mad Lib programming before. It really comes from all the Android-y activity type of stuff. So you can take a look at this spec later. I mean, the main new topic that is on this is dealing with multiple activities. So last week in section, you practiced that a little, and in lecture I've done some content on that. I don't know, my internet's really slow right now. But anyway, there's just a few starter files, like some MadLib input files. I want you to write a program that has 3 activities. One is just kind of a front page where you pick what story you want to fill in. And the next page is you fill in things like type an adjective, type a noun, type a place, type a person's name. And then once you're done with all of those, it jumps to your story and all the words that you filled in. And you make a silly story with those random words that you put in there. So again, that's something you might have seen before, but that's okay. I think it's a pretty different take on it to do it as an Android app. In fact, I don't know about you guys, but one of the things I always think is fun when I learn a new type of programming, like I learned web programming a while ago, and now learning Android programming, was to like go take some program that I had as kind of a dumpy little console program from Java or C++ or something, or just some program I had written before in one other setting, and then take that similar kind of program and try to code it as an Android app or as a web app or something. So we're going to do a little bit of that here. So anyway, that's been posted. Take a look when you have time. It's due in the middle of next week. It's like all the other assignments moving forward. It's going to be a pair assignment, so if you want to work with a buddy, you can do that. So there you go. I think, now don't tell on me, but I'm pretty sure I'm not allowed to use that Mad Libs logo because I think it's actually like a trademarked logo or something. Some people are real picky about that stuff. I just figure I'm going to do it until somebody sues me. I'm going to use images I have no right to use. Oh well. But there is like a company that sells books of Mad Libs, and that's their logo. So I'm using their stuff. Oh well. So that's assignment 3. Now, in terms of today, what I want to talk about today, wait, is this the right link right here? Yeah, so it says multimedia, fragments, landscape, orientation. So, I mean, the main thing I want to talk about today is something called fragments. And the goal of that, the reason we're going to learn about that, fragments is something that allows you to kind of have a unit of UI, a unit of the user interface of your app that's a little bit smaller than an activity. Like an activity is a full screen worth of UI. A fragment is like a part of a screen full of UI. And the reason you might want fragments is so that you can kind of take chunks of the screen and recompose them and mix them and match them. And in particular, where that would be useful is if you have an app that you want a different layout when you rotate it to landscape mode versus when you have it in portrait tall mode. And so that's kind of the theme of today. And I have to admit that fragments are kind of complicated, and so it'll probably take me all lecture to just go through this and write some code to show it to you. And I think it's a little bit unfortunate. I think Android programming is kind of a little bit more complex than I think it needs to be. And I wish that I could just go in there and change some stuff about it, make it a little simpler for students, but whatever. I feel like this is something, fragments are a pretty important topic in Android coding, so I think we have to learn about them. So let's just jump into this. The thing here says we're also going to learn about media. There's some slides I have there about like how to play a sound file, like MP3 or a WAV file, as well as how to make your app talk, like text to speech. And I will cover that at the end of class today if I have time, else I'll cover it Thursday. I really want to make sure I get this fragment stuff done, though, so let's do that first. So fragments, here we go. A fragment, well, it's useful in a situation like this where you want to have different layouts in different circumstances. The most common thing that I think of is portrait versus landscape. I already mentioned that, but sometimes it's not about that. Sometimes it's about if you have a different device, like if you have a really big screen like a tablet versus a little tiny screen like a small phone. It could be that you want to show a slightly different UI in certain countries or locations versus others. I haven't talked about localization, internationalization stuff at all, but certainly you not only would want to have different language, different words in the screen, but you might also reorganize how things look. Some countries have right to left reading, and so you might use that, or there's lots of different reasons why you might have a little bit different appearance in your app under certain circumstances than others. I'm going to focus on portrait versus landscape, but that's just one example. So the picture here, this is a very common circumstance where you'd want to do this. We've been learning about apps that have multiple activities, and I think I told you before that a pretty common paradigm looks a little bit like these screenshots. Do you understand what I'm trying to show with these screenshots here? Like, what are these two activities for? I mean, it's just a generic looking picture, but. Yeah.
One of them appears to be a list of something.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the other one seems to be like a login or something.
Yeah, it's either, well, okay, so this one isn't very clear what it is, but I think the intent of the pictures is like, here's a list of things, you click one of them, and then it becomes the details about that one.
Oh.
This could be a login too, but I think if I meant that, I might have put it before the list. Maybe you log in and then you see the list. You could certainly have all three of those in an app, right? So if we would call this the like main activity or the list activity, and then if this is the details about one of the elements activity, so the main and details or list and details, that's a pretty common paradigm like we talked about. And if your app is in the portrait mode, maybe that's what you would do. You have two activities for that. If you had a nice big screen with a landscape, like someone had tilted it to be a wide screen, that might not be the UI that you would want. Maybe you'd want something more like this, where the list of stuff is on the left and the details about one, if you tap it, the details are on the right. But the list stays there. It doesn't go from the list to the details. You see both at all times. You click, look at some details, scroll a little bit, click a different one. Now its details appear. So suddenly the two things that used to be separate are all on the same screen at the same time. See that? So you could totally do that. You can do that the sort of the dumb way, or you can do it the less dumb way. The dumb way to do that is to redundantly have all the code for this twice. You know, like you have this as an activity, you have this as an activity, each of which has its own Kotlin file and its own XML layout file. And then when you want to do this, you write another third activity that sort of copy pastes all the code from both of these, and you know what I mean? Like you just mush it all together. You could do that, but that seems silly, right? The joke I used to tell was there's only three things computer scientists don't like: redundancy, inefficiency, and redundancy. And then I heard a different version of the joke, which was there's only three things computer scientists don't like: redundancy, inefficiency, redundancy, off by one bugs, and scope creep. Anyway, whatever. The joke just gets worse the more stuff you add to it. But so we don't want to have our app do this by redundantly repeating all the code, of course. But let's just talk about if you wanted to do this at all, how would you even begin to do that? Well, you can specify resources for your app in these special folders. So you know how a project has a res folder for resources, and inside of that you have like drawable, you have layout, you have these different subfolders of resources, right? Well, you can create folders that are named like drawable dash something or layout dash something or whatever. And depending on what the suffix is here, it will use that resource or that information only in certain environments. So one example is, you have these images that are drawable images. And we just put them in the folder called drawable, that's fine. But you can make a folder called like drawable high dots per inch or extra high dots per. DPI is like how sharp, the pixel, how tiny the pixels are on the screen. You know how if you have a kind of older device, you can see the little rectangular pixels if you hold your face up to the screen, versus if you have a beautiful new Retina or a brand new iPad or some of the newer Mac displays, the screen's super sharp. And even if you're up pretty close, it's kind of hard to see the little pixels, That's the dots per inch. The sharp it is, the more DPI you have, right? So you could put different images in the app for a low DPI device versus a high DPI device. Why would you do that? In theory, you could just put one set of images that would work for everybody, but it's going to be suboptimal for someone. Like if their device is very high res and you put low resolution images, the images will look blurry and blocky on their screen. Or if you put super duper high resolution images in your app, then somebody who has a low resolution screen is wasting a lot of space and a lot of memory on those images because they're too sharp, they have too much detail. So, maybe if you have an app that's used by lots of people, you want to put different images for different people. There's also, you can have different layouts. You can say, hey, if I'm using a large screen, I want this layout. If I have a small screen, I want that layout. Like you can provide 2 different XML files, and you actually don't need to put any code like in Kotlin to handle this. Like just by placing these files into these folders, Android will detect what is going on with the device right now, and it'll use the right folder and the right file for the current circumstance. If the screen is large, it'll use the layout large file. If the orientation is landscape, it'll use the layout landscape file. So we're going to focus on this one. If you want a separate layout for landscape versus portrait, you make a folder called layout land. Hooray, let's go to layout land. Hooray! You put a separate layout XML file there, and then the app will have a different layout in that orientation. So that's a general idea. We could spend lots of time talking about all the different variations of all these different folders, but I just wanted to intro that so I could go to layout land, so I could show you that we could have an alternate layout file. And in the picture here, that's kind of showing you, I have a normal layout folder with an activity XML file. That's my layout in tall portrait mode. Then I separately make a layout land folder with this same name, and that one will be used if I turn the app sideways, okay? This also kind of goes back to, remember the sort of confusing stuff I was talking about last time about these different activity states, activity lifecycle, and I talked about like, on pause, on resume, on destroy, all that kind of stuff. And I showed you that if you rotate the screen, the app gets kind of messed up. Do you remember that? Like I would rotate the screen and my vocabulary words would get jumbled up and all that. And I sort of just threw up my hands and said this is kind of badly designed, it's kind of dumb, but the reason Android is doing that, the reason it reboots your thing is because it wants to reload your layout just in case you have a different layout for landscape mode. And so these things all kind of go together. Anyway, okay, so what would you do if you actually wanted to create a landscape layout? My suggestion would be in the Android Studio. I'll show you how to do it in a second, but you can right-click and say you want a new layout file, and then it creates it. And then probably what you would do is you'd go copy and paste from the existing one, and then make the changes that you want it to be different. So I want to have an app that we work on today that kind of plays with this stuff. So, I really want to appeal to you guys' generation by picking an example that's relevant and cool to you guys. So today we're going to work on a Pokédex. And I don't actually know anything about Pokemon, and I actually don't even like Pokemon. And I think you're all weird if you like Pokemon, but like I'm throwing you a bone here, So if you want to see what this app is, I'm doing something a little bit different today. I don't usually walk in with a lot of code that I wrote outside of lecture, And I am doing that today because if I start from scratch, we're not going to finish anything. We need an app that has multiple activities so I can fiddle with it and stuff. And I didn't have one that we had already written that made sense for this. So let me show you what I got here. It might seem like there's nothing to do because we already have the app. So here's the Pokédex app, and it shows all the little Pokemons. And I have to be honest, I only know the name of like 4 of these. Have you seen these quizzes that are like Pokemon character or like cryptocurrency or whatever or something? What was the one you said?
Pharmaceutical drug?
Yeah, drug or Pokemon. It's really funny, yeah. Anyway, I don't know very many Pokemon, but like, that's Pikachu and that's Jigglypuff. Like, who's this guy? Bottom right here. Vulpix? Oh, well, if I click on him or her, so this app is like, click on a Pokemon and you can read more about it, okay? Hooray. Hope you're happy. So again, it's already written, like that, the code is already here. I want to just briefly show you the code so that we have some familiarity with it, although we don't have time to sit here and look at all of it in detail. If you really want to look at this, it's already on the class website on the lecture page for today. It's a zip. You could download it and look at it or whatever. But so let me kind of familiarize you with what we have here. So these images of these Pokemon are in a drawable folder. I just have whatever the Pokemon name is, .ping, okay? Then the initial activity here that you see with all the Pokemon in it is called the Pokédex activity. The layout for that, it just has a text view at the top. It says Pokédex. And I have another text view that, that says, click on a Pokemon to learn about it or whatever. And then I have I don't know why this should say plus, sorry. Then I have why is this lit up? Oh well. Then I have just this like table, this layout of the rows and columns of the different Pokemon, okay? No wait, why is this red? It cannot resolve symbol. It's right there. I don't know, whatever. So that's the main Pokédex layout, and if you click all these guys, down here, these are all image buttons, okay? So these are image buttons, and it says on click equals Pokemon click. Pokemon click is a function. It just opens up the other activity. We learned about intent, so use an intent to jump from one activity to another. So the main one is the Pokédex, and the other one where you read about a particular Pokemon is the details activity. So I make an intent, and I say I want to run the details activity. I tell it which Pokemon name I'm interested in, and then I start it. And then over here in the details activity, there's not very much stuff going on here. It's just an image of a Pokemon and his name and a description of him. So like an image, a name, and then details, description of him. And so when my details activity loads up, I read from the intent the Pokemon's name, and then I look up the image, the text file, and then the contents of the text file, and then I just set them to appear on the screen, and then I see the details about that Pokemon. So that's kind of what we have coming into this, okay? Does that make sense? Do you have any question about kind of where we're starting from here? This is not that different than some of the other stuff we did, like even in section you did a poem and poetry kind of list. It's a little bit similar to that, right? Click one and see details about it, right? Yep.
Is the value Pokemon name, when you have the question mark colon Pikachu, does that mean that if they click something that you didn't have the info for, it just automatically does Pikachu?
Yeah, question colon is kind of like a default operator. It's like give me the value of the Pokemon name that was passed in, but for some reason if there isn't one, give me Pikachu. Question colon is like, if the thing before me is null, then use this instead or something. So it's like, try to get the Pokemon's name, but if there isn't one, use Pikachu. So yeah. Otherwise, it's pretty. Most of the concepts here are things we've done. Okay, so but the goal isn't to write this. I mean, the goal is I want to reshape it. We've been learning about these different layouts and stuff. So of course, this is going to be a candidate of an app where you could imagine a view in the landscape mode. So if I rotate the phone here, the emulator, it should redraw. And this doesn't look too bad. I'm not saying it like sucks in landscape mode, but like, okay, I click on green frog guy with an onion on his back. Bulbasaur. Okay, cool. I'm just kidding. I know Bulbasaur, but it's like I'm the perfect age where I actually kind of know some of this stuff, but then I can act surly about it too. So okay, so anyway, this isn't that bad, right? This app looks okay, but I do think it would look better if the list of the Pokemon were sort of taking up like half the screen or something, and then the description would be over here. So this is our app to explore this stuff today, right? Okay, so let's start out with this layout land. We want to make a layout land folder. So let me just do that to kind of prove that that is a thing that you can do. So if I go to the resource area here and I see the layouts, I can right click and I can say new layout file. And it pops up this little bit confusing dialog. It wants to know some things. Don't panic. The file name is, I want it to be a new layout for the Pokédex activity. So I'll just type in activity Pokédex.xml. And then it says, it basically wants to know like under what conditions should I use this layout. And I'll say when the orientation is landscape. So then it says, I'll put it in layout land for you. And also, honestly, this is just a wizard to make the file for me. If I don't want to use this and I just go create the layout land folder and put a file in it, that works fine too, but whatever. So I say OK. And so now over here, the display is kind of interesting. It shows that I have the details activity, but now it shows a little like almost like a folder for Pokédex activity. It's got the regular one that I already talked about here, and then it's got the landscape one. Right now there's nothing in the landscape one. So a good starting point would be just come over here and grab all of this and paste it. You could do that. And now you could do things like, well, I don't want this to fill the whole screen. So, maybe instead of taking up the whole screen, I could come up to the overall layout and I could say the width is like, I don't know, 300 pixels or I don't know what. Like you could sit here and like kind of size this thing. But now you want stuff over here. So I want to be careful though, because what I did here is what I said I didn't want to do with my bad jokes. I was being redundant. I copied and pasted all the contents from the other file. So this is kind of not what we really do. However, I do want to prove to you that that at least works. So I'm going to run it real quick, and I want to rotate the screen and see that it does at least constrain the size of it when I rotate, because that will tell us that it's at least using this new layout file that we made, right? I could have made them more different. Oh, so I think it's working, right? Like, wait, what's happening? There, so that's in the portrait mode. It takes up the full screen, great. And if I rotate it to landscape mode, it's half. And again, like I could have changed more to make it really clear. I could have written like, this is the landscape one. You know what I mean? Like I could have made more differences here. But this mechanism seems to be working overall. Okay, so now we talked about this. If you want, you can use the same layout for both portrait and landscape, and you say, I don't want to reload when you change the orientation. But I don't want to do that today because that's kind of the opposite of what I'm trying to do today. So, okay, you can write code. I said a second ago, you don't need to write any Kotlin code to deal with what orientation that you're in general. Like just making that new layout XML file is all you need to do. Android will detect that you're in landscape mode and it'll do the rest, But sometimes you want to have some code that says, hey, if I'm in portrait mode, draw this animation. So if you want to know what orientation you're in, you can ask like that. And this code would go like in your activity. You could say if resources.configuration.orientation equals. I can never remember this. I always come back to my own slide and copy and paste it. I can never remember what to type to find this. But anyway, that's how you check for those things. Maybe we'll use that later. We don't need anything with that right now. So, again, the problem is we get into redundancy. I don't want to copy and paste all the XML into both, right? Because, just to be more clear, like we did the thing where we constrained the size in landscape mode. We made it, narrower. Well, then if we wanted the details about the Pokemon to be on the right, we'd have to go to the details one and copy and paste all of that. And it just seems like a bad idea to copy paste all this stuff, right? And we'd all copy paste all the event handling logic and all that kind of stuff, right? So, what actually happens here? Oh yeah, question. Go ahead.
So on the previous slide where you had the if to check if it's landscape or portrait, where would you put that in your code to then do things?
Well, just anywhere, like on create or on the click of a button. You might say, what I want it to do when you click this button is different if it's in portrait mode than if it's in landscape mode. So in the on-click handler for that button, I'll say if else on this. I think you'll see in a second, like I will use this sort of if else once I start doing more surgery on the code. But yeah, I mean, this kind of code could go anywhere. I mean, remember what you have in an activity, right? You have an onCreate method when it loads, and you probably have some sort of number of event handling functions. So it could be in the body of any of those functions, wherever it was appropriate that you wanted to do that. Okay, so I don't want to repeat the logic. And something that might be a little hard to see about this problem is like, in the portrait mode, we want two whole activities that are completely separate from each other. And in landscape mode, we don't want two activities, we want all of it to be together as one activity. Now you might, I mean, maybe that's just a vocabulary thing, but it's like an activity is always a whole screen of layout. You cannot make an activity and then squish it and make it, you know, not fill the screen and then fill the rest of the screen with another activity. That's not how Android works. So like, if you're thinking I can just resize these so that it'll look like that, that just isn't gonna happen. You have to restructure the code to allow two of these kind of things to be on the screen at the same time as each other. So, the vehicle for doing that in Android is called a fragment. A fragment is a sort of medium-sized chunk of a user interface. The smallest chunk of a user interface is called a view or a widget. A single button, a single checkbox, something like that. The largest chunk of UI is called an activity. It's a whole screen. So somewhere between a widget and a whole screen is a fragment. A fragment is a part of a screen, a rectangular region that contains widgets in it. And you can compose an activity by sticking one or more fragments into it. So basically what I'm going to do with this code, with this app that I come in with, this Pokédex, is I'm going to convert my code so that the list of all the grid of the Pokemon pictures is a fragment. And the detail UI about telling you about one Pokemon is a fragment. And then I can recompose them to look different ways in different situations. So what I'll do with those fragments is, if you're in portrait mode, I will create activities that each just contain one of the two fragments only. So it's like an activity with one fragment inside, an activity with one fragment inside, so that the distinction is sort of lost between the two. But over here, I will create one activity that has both of the fragments inside. Android will let me do that. So that's what I'm going to do. Fragment, okay? Does that concept make sense? I mean, you understand why I need to do that? I mean, like, it won't let me put two of them on the screen at once if they're both activities. You understand? So that's what we're going to do. Question, yeah?
So a fragment can be smaller than one activity, right? Like you can have smaller things in it?
A fragment can be smaller than an activity, right? So I think the idea is like, you make a fragment. I mean, a fragment conceptually is kind of like an activity. Mm-hmm. It's like an XML tag that you can put widgets inside of, or you can put smaller things inside of it. So we can make a fragment that has a list view in it, or a fragment that has buttons in it, or whatever. And then we can make another fragment that's got a detail view of an image and a text box under it, and we can make that a fragment. And now those fragments are like recomposable units that you could put anywhere. You could say this activity contains this fragment, that activity contains that fragment, this third activity contains these three fragments. You can sort of mix and match them within is that one of you guys? Within you can mix and match them within activities as you see fit. Okay, anyway. My wife, she listens to this awful country music. And I got her this nice Bose Bluetooth speaker a year ago. I think it was for Christmas or something. And she had her phone, attached to it so it would play the audio out there. And she would go like out to, I don't know, do some yard work or something. And she would have her phone and she'd try to play music, and it would start playing in the house with me. So now I got to listen to her bad music, and then she's like, oh, it's not playing. So she turned it up, and now it's blasting at the maximum volume. She's like, I can't hear. And then she'd call me, and she'd say, I hear my music, but it sounds like far away. What's going on? I'm like, honey, it's playing out the Bluetooth speaker again. So I got revenge on her by blasting my emo European noise at her later. But anyway, whatever. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to make fragments. Let me teach you a little bit more about how you make fragments. The UI for doing it is just in Android Studio. You right-click in your place of your code that you have your Java files, your Kotlin files, whatever, and you just say new fragment. There's a couple different kinds. I would say just choose a blank fragment. I'll show you right now. I mean, basically what we're going to do is we're going to make one fragment for the Pokédex list, and we're going to make one fragment for the details, and then the activities will sort of use them, okay? So I have to admit, a little bit of today is going to be like me reshaping, refactoring, modifying this code to work as fragments, which that might be super exciting for all of us. But let me right-click up here, and I'll say new fragment, blank. And usually what I'll do is I'll name it the same as what are currently the activities. So I'll make a Pokédex fragment. Now, I will say, when you make a new fragment, it wants to like insert a bunch of useless crap that you do not need. And so like I do want to create an XML layout file for it because we're going to configure what the fragment looks like. But it has these buttons here that are like, do you want factory methods or something? And do you want interface callbacks? And I suggest you just don't check those because it just inserts code that you don't need. In fact, even without them checked, it inserts some code that you don't need. So here I have a Pokédex fragment. And like, for example, it puts these constants up here that I have no use for, so just delete them. It puts a comment header. Yuck, no one wants commenting. It inserts a little bit of code. Now, I don't want to talk about the code very much yet. I guess what I'll start by saying is it's a lot like an activity, although it isn't quite an activity. I will come back to the Kotlin code in a second, but the fragment has an XML file. And this is very similar to the XML file that an activity would use. So you can basically take the contents of your activity and paste them in here. So, I mean, what I'm going to do here kind of as some of my next work is I'm going to convert the two activities I have into two fragments. So let's do the Pokédex first. If I open the Pokédex, oh, that's the landscape one. Well, I want the regular one, the Pokédex. Yeah, the regular one. Okay, so if I copy this, I could just paste this like in here. Okay, so that's fine. It looks like that or whatever. It all works fine, except if you look carefully, it doesn't like this like onClick equals Pokemon click. That's partly because in the fragment there is no Pokemon click function yet. It's looking there and it doesn't see it, but there's a little more to it than that. But I mean, that's a start. Then I'm going to go here and I'm going to say I want another new fragment. And this one is going to be the details fragment. There we go. And again, it inserts some crap that I don't need, so I'm just going to delete it. And mostly right now I want to play with the layout fragment details here. And I will go to the details fragment activity and I'll copy paste all that stuff in here into the fragment. So I'll just paste it in like this. Okay. So I mean, it doesn't look like much of anything here because it doesn't know which Pokemon to show or whatever, right? So okay, that's a start. Now what you do, I told you a second ago that fragments can be kind of recomposed by activities. So what you'll do is you'll go back to your activities like the Pokédex activity here. And instead of all this stuff, like I moved all that stuff into the Pokédex fragment. So now here, basically all I'm going to say is I want to have a Pokédex fragment in me. So I think it's a little confusing because at the moment the activity is just a thin wrapper around the fragment, but we're going to change it up a little bit in landscape mode, right? So let me show you how do I put the fragment inside the activity. That is done like this. Inside of your activity XML, inside of whatever its layout is, you write a fragment tag, and you have to supply certain attributes. You have to say the name of the fragment, which is the same as the class name, so it would be like Pokédex fragment or something. You also have to give it an ID. You also have to set what layout it uses. So let me show you. The best way to do it is you come in here and you say bracket fragment, and then it wants to autocomplete, so I press enter. And it kind of auto-inserts some stuff. I can say width match the parent, height match the parent, sure, whatever. So there. Now let me go copy some of those attributes from the slide that I said I needed. I need these attributes here. So let me copy and paste them. The ID of this, let's just call this, I don't know, the Pokédex fragment or whatever. The class name here is Pokédex fragment. It auto-completes it for me. The layout of it is at layout/Pokédex, or I guess it's fragment Pokédex. It's asking me what XML file contains the layout for this thing. The reason it wants to know is so that it can draw a preview of it over here. So now, I mean, I guess, I don't know if you guys are getting lost in some of all the details, all these files and stuff, but like, basically what I did is I moved all the code for the grid of Pokemon into the fragment, and now I made the activity just only contain that fragment, okay? So for now, I guess, you know, this is a point in the coding where like it's not that impressive because it's just back how it was before, right? But I'm going somewhere with this, right? We can do the same thing for the details. So the details activity currently has a bunch of stuff in it, but instead of that, let's delete all the guts of that and say we want a fragment in here. And that fragment is going to be the details fragment. So again, I'll go back to my slide and I'll paste this stuff in here. Let's call this, what did I call it in the other one? I called it Pokédex fragment. Okay, so I'll call it details fragment. The class name is details fragment. The layout is details, fragment details. Okay, so again, like both of these guys are thin wrappers around the fragment that they contain. That's not the cool part. The cool part is now in landscape mode, I can put more than one fragment within the same activity. That's the whole point to why I'm doing this. So if I go, remember how I have the layout land version of activity Pokédex? I'll go back to here, and remember the contents of this, I cut and pasted all of it from the portrait version, and then I just set its width to be less or something. So what I'll do instead is I'll remove all that stuff, and I'll say that I want two fragments in here. I want the Pokédex on the left, and I want the details on the right, if in landscape mode, you see. So let's do that. All I got to do, I think, is just go here and copy this and paste it here. So I got the Pokédex, except I want it to be less wide, so how about like 350 pixels or something there. And now, next to it, I want the details fragment, this one. Where is it? This one. Boom. So now it doesn't look quite right. It's like sitting here. I believe the reason is because, well, maybe I'll ask you guys. Why do you think it looks a little off? Do you know what's going on? In the back, what do you think? Yeah.
The width is match parent.
The width says match parent. Yeah, I mean, one thing to remember is the overall layout of this activity is the constraint layout, and if you have a constraint layout, you have to like attach things to things. And so the widths and the heights of these fragments, I mean, we're used to thinking of the outer container as just filling the whole screen, but now it doesn't necessarily fill the whole screen. So when you have two or more fragments all on the same screen together, you need to like anchor them where they need to be located. So I think let's start with the Pokédex fragment here. I think he needs to be, so I just, you know, you might get used to doing this in the editor where you drag the little circles and touch them and stuff, but for this I kind of like to just do it here. Like I want the top and the bottom and the left of this to be anchored to those same edges of the parent. So I want the top to be constrained to touch the top of the parent, and I want the bottom to touch the bottom of the parent, and I want my left to touch the left of the parent, and then the right I won't say, that won't be constrained to anything, but my width will indicate where the right side of me will be. So I hope you understand, like that was equivalent to me dragging and touching those ovals and stuff, right? So then the detail fragment, I will take his top and bottom and I'll attach them to the parent. So let's put those like that. I will attach his right side to the right of the parent, and his left side, what am I going to do with his left side? What is the details part here? What is its left side constrained with?
To the other fragment.
Attach it to the right side of the other fragment. Right. So I mean, another way of thinking of it is like, this guy gets 350 pixels, and the other guy gets the rest. So I will attach his left side to the right of ID/Pokédex fragment. Did I do that right? Isn't he supposed to? Oh, so you might say, wait, he still looks like he's in the wrong place. Why do you think that is? Like, we constrained all 4 of his corners, so that ought to do it, right? Still something wrong. I think it goes back to what you said a minute ago.
Still match parent.
I still have the width set to match parent, right? So I think if you just set it to 0, that will. It doesn't. I don't know if it matters. If you just say wrap. I don't know if wrap content works. Just if you set it to 0, it'll use the constraints to size it. So whatever. It's yeah. Go ahead.
So instead of specifying the exact width of the first one, could you instead say like match parent divided by 2?
Yeah, I don't know how to do percentages. You would think you could just say like 50%. I don't think they have that. That's 50 point. There are layouts that allow percentages, but I don't think I know how to do a percent. Do you know?
No,
Or you have a different question?
Yeah. What are the pixel dimensions of the screen?
Right. What are the dimensions of the screen? Well, I mean, it does matter. It depends what kind of device you have, right? But I think that the goal of some of these units is to help avoid dealing with that. You can use units like pixel px or point or millimeters or inches or whatever, and that's like if you want it to be a certain physical size. Like if I say I want this to be 1 inch, then it will literally be 1 inch in the real world. And if my screen is big or if my screen is small, it'll take 1 inch of, you know what I mean? Like exactly an inch by an inch, you can say that if you want a real world unit, but then that would scale depending on the screen DPI. If you say you want like DPs or SPs, I believe the difference is that SPs are like scaling pixels and DPs are device pixels. So like, I get them all mixed up to be honest with you, but I believe the scaling pixel will look more uniform from device to device because it sort of like makes those pixels seem bigger if you have a bigger screen. It makes them seem smaller if you have a smaller screen. So what I usually do is I'll set like 350 scaling pixels, and like it will capture that sort of ratio we have here, and it'll adjust it for different screens to do the right thing. So I wish we could just say percent, but as far as I've read, you have to just download a whole custom layout if you want to do stuff with percents, which I think is a little bit ridiculous. But anyway, this will do. I think we could spend more time on some of the nuances of layout and stuff, but I just wanted to show you like you can make one of them one size and the other one the other size, and you know, you sometimes can just say wrap content. If the widgets are a certain size, it'll just pack them to match their size. But with some of these image buttons, you can stretch them and scale them. Anyway, this version, the landscape version of the Pokédex activity, has both of them on the screen at the same time. So I don't know, like I think I told you that fragments kind of suck and they're kind of confusing or whatever, and I don't know if I've totally shown that yet. I mean, maybe there's a little bit of muck here, but you might say, oh, that's not so bad. We're not done yet. Look at the clock. You still got a while left, right? Because there's some stuff we haven't done yet, which is that we've carried over all the XML, all the layout. It looks good, but we haven't changed the Kotlin code to make it work. And it's not as simple to just copy and paste over the Kotlin code. So I want to talk about that a little bit. That's what we're going to spend most of the rest of our time dealing with. So fragments are a little bit like activities in the sense that they have a life cycle. You're like, oh God, no, not again. So it has an on create, it has an on attach, on pause, on resume. It has a lot of these on methods the way that an activity does. However, they add in a couple more because, hey, why not? Let's just have some more activity life cycle methods, right? And the new ones that are added have to do with every fragment has to be inside of an activity. And so sometimes the fragment wants to know some stuff about the status of the activity that it is inside of. And so that manifests itself here as there are some methods like on activity created and on detach and on destroyed. There's some methods here that have to do with not you, but on the activity containing you. And look, I think as with the previous stuff, the activity lifecycle methods that we saw last week, I think a lot of these you don't always need to like worry about them or override them or whatever. it's helpful to sometimes override one or two of them in certain cases. And so that's kind of what I'm showing you here. And I've bolded the two that I think you really need to know. So there's one, when you make a new fragment class, you have to have a method called onCreateView, which is essentially equal to the onCreate method of an activity. It kind of sets it up or whatever. And Android will make it for you. Android Studio will make that method for you when you say you want a new fragment. So you actually don't need to write that one. You need it, but you don't need to write it. Then there's another method called onActivityCreated, which, like, if you would have had some initialization code or setup code, you should put that code in there, in onActivityCreated. And you might say, well, wait, why doesn't that code go in onCreateView? Well, it's because fragments depend on their enclosing activity to help them initialize or read certain resources or something like that. And so the activity needs to be ready to help the fragment do that. And so if you put code in onCreateView, the activity sometimes isn't ready to help you yet, and so stuff crashes and it's confusing. So, I mean, I'll show you what I think is a pattern that you can follow for your code to work properly, but I'm just telling you that, like, if you look at this list of all these different methods, it's like, well, if I have some startup code, when the fragment starts up, I want to do something, where do I put that code? You need to wait till at least onActivityCreated. If you do it any earlier than that, the activity kind of isn't ready and stuff doesn't work. If you try to load resources, if you try to get things by ID and mess with them, they don't always work. So, like, I would put any such code in the onActivityCreated method. I'll show you that in a second. Okay, so let's try that real quick. So if I go, let's convert the Pokédex activity, let's convert his Kotlin code into Pokédex fragment Kotlin code. So what do we have? We have onCreate, and we have a function that should be called every time that they click one of the buttons. Okay, so really, I mean, the onCreate is just default code. We didn't even write anything for that. This function I've got selected is the thing I really need to bring over. So if I grab this and I go paste it into Pokédex fragment, now let me put these next to each other. Pokédex activity has onCreate. Pokédex fragment has onCreateView. Now, I think this looks really frightening. Like, what is all this stuff? Like, wait, what? Parenthesis colon view? Question mark? Like, what is all this stuff? I think that this indentation is confusing. Like, this is a function. It takes parameters. The first parameter is an inflator. The second parameter is a container. The third parameter is a bundle. That's it. It returns a view that could be null. And then it's already got some code in here that returns something. You do not need to modify this. Just leave it. Don't touch it. The method that you're going to want, if you need to do any initialization, is that other one, onActivityCreated. So I'm pasting the event handler from the activity over to here. So let's talk about this for a second. Mostly that code pasted just fine, except this line of code. It doesn't work. I'll show you what it says. It says, cannot be called with the arguments supplied, something about context, blah, blah, blah. Do you have any guess why that line of code now doesn't compile where it used to compile?
Intents refer to activities, and I guess they won't carry across for, this won't carry across for fragment.
Yeah, that's right. So when you create an intent, you have to pass two parameters. The first one we just wrote this, and then second we wrote what activity we want to launch. Well, why did we write this? Basically, you have to pass in, like, what activity am I going from, and what activity am I going to? And if you say this in a fragment, this is not an activity, this is a fragment, so it's the wrong data type. It doesn't like that anymore. So that doesn't work. Okay, well, so basically what you want is, like, whatever activity that the fragment is in, you want to pass that as a parameter, right? So if you're in a fragment, where is this slide? Where is it? There is a global property inside of every fragment called the activity property, and you can just refer to that, and that's the activity that you are in right now. So that's it. I mean, basically, instead of passing this, you pass activity. Now, if you're wondering, like, what is that? Well, it's technically a method called getActivity that returns the activity, but it's there. So you can just use that. So that pretty much works, okay? And we'll find that there are some other pieces of code that have this same thing. Whenever you call certain methods that you're used to calling from the code we've written so far, if you try to call some of those methods from a fragment, I think what you'll find is that a few of those methods don't work. They're missing. So, if you try to say, like, open raw resource, that's a method we use to read a file, or open file input, or something like that. Those methods just aren't even here, they don't work. But if you say like activity dot open raw resource, like dot open, like whatever, those methods are in there now, you know what I'm saying? So like if you're bringing code over from an activity to a fragment, you sometimes have to patch it and say activity dot, activity dot, activity dot in order for it to work. Okay? Any question about that? Okay, well let's do a similar thing with the details activity. The details activity has some code like on create. We load the Pokemon for the the name that they pass me as a parameter. So if I sort of cut this code and I go to the detail fragment, again, like don't put it in this on create view. The real initialization that I think you should do is in this on activity created method. If you need to do some startup code, put it there. So here's how you do it. Just start typing on activity created. There, it wants to auto-complete it, so press enter. It just fills in the header for you. So now after the super thingy, just paste this like that. Okay? So it's mad at me again. It doesn't like this. So what do you think I need to do? Anyone? Yeah?
Activity.intent.
Activity.intent. Yeah, if the activity that started me has an intent that's not null, then I'll do activity.intent. Now, it doesn't like activity.intent. Any guesses why it doesn't like that? I mean, this is the right track, but what? Do you want to see the error? It says only safe or non-null asserted calls allowed. So technically, your activity could be null. And I think I mentioned to you in this like dumb life cycle, if you're too early in the life cycle, the activity surrounding you has not been created yet. It's kind of weird. It like builds your UI from the inside out. So like it makes all the fragments first, then it makes the activity, then it puts them in it. So like the variable, the activity variable is of type activity question mark. So I can't call things on it unless I say question.indent or exclamation.indent. Maybe question mark would be better. So then in here, you just have to use the operators, right? Okay, I think question mark works there too. Does it? No, maybe not. Maybe exclamation mark. Okay, so this is a nullness issue. Yeah, question?
I didn't get exactly why you putting a question mark on all these operators.
The reason is because the data type of this variable is not activity, it's activity question mark. The activity that contains the fragment could be null. So if it's a nullable type, it's a question mark type. And if you try to call things on an object that could be null in Kotlin, you get a compiler error. You have to have a test for null, or you have to use a question mark operator or an exclamation operator to describe what you want to do if it's null. This thing here, if it's null, then the test will be false and it won't enter the if statement. So this is basically the same as saying if activity isn't null and the activity intent is not null. It's basically the same as all of that combined. You say, well, if itself isn't null and its intent isn't null, that's the short way of saying that. I mean, it's a little bit annoying. The language is trying to protect us here. So the other thing that's interesting is it doesn't recognize this, Pokemon name, Pokemon image, Pokemon details. What do you think these are? Do you know what those variables are, like where they come from? I mean, you haven't seen this code in a lot of detail, but yeah?
For the IDs in your
Yes, those are the IDs of the widgets, right? So, when you type, if you're editing your code and you start typing an ID, it like auto-completes it for you, but secretly what it does is it goes up here and it like imports those IDs into your file somehow. So if it doesn't recognize them, you can just double click them and hit, I think, Alt-Enter and say import. And then I think it finds them all now. So I think the way that it makes these magical variables work is I think it has this magical import that's like Kotlin, synthetic, fragment. I don't totally understand. Anyway, I'm just trying to show you how to get this to work, Like you have to re-import some stuff. You have to write activity dot on some stuff. But in general, your code is going to mostly paste over, right? Okay. Wait, I still have an error. I still have some kind of red. What's the problem? There's some kind of parameter here. When you load resources, it asks for the package name. Well, that's just activity.package name, I think. Whatever. When in doubt, add activity dot in front of it, and it will work. So I think we're doing pretty well, but we're still missing, something that's pretty important, which is like when they're side by side. I want to think about that. We haven't quite got the code right to handle that yet. Yes?
So before you did this thing where like you put 2 exclamation points and you didn't have to do it later because you already said like trust me it worked. Why do you have to do it later now?
Yeah, I don't know if I understand. So I think if I said val act equals activity, and then if I said act dot intent, and then I said act, does that work? So it doesn't work because technically when you refer to the property, it calls a method, and it wonders whether the method call might return null again the next time, even if you checked it before. Do you understand? Like this, it's dumb, right? I don't like this, but it's like if I save it as a variable, it knows that I didn't change my variable. But if I refer to that property, technically that's a method call, and the method could return whatever it wants each call, and it's not positive that it won't just get mad at me and return a null the next time. So I think that's why it's doing that. But yeah, anyway, whatever. So we're getting there. We're almost done. There's a couple things going on. One of the most important things that's not right at this point is the event behavior. If you look at the main Pokedex fragment, there's a couple things wrong here. So let me put it on the screen so you can see it. Where is it? I want the whole activity. I want the landscape one. Okay, so if I'm in this mode, landscape mode, when I click on these guys, I want to see their details appear over here, right? That's not what it's going to do right now. Because the code says when you click on a button, I want to start a new activity. That's not what I want it to do if I'm in landscape mode. That's what I want it to do if I'm in portrait mode. Do you understand? So he had a question earlier about like when do I want to say if else on my orientation. This is a place where maybe I would want to do that. But before I even do that, I still have another problem which I want to fix first. I want to actually get it so I can run it. I believe it won't run yet because if I look at the UI for the Pokédex fragment, I'm pretty sure you can't use this on click in a fragment. Last time I tried, it didn't work. I can run it and see. But I believe we might need to alter our event code. Oops, what am I doing? Here, build failed. Wait, what? Hold on. Compilation failed. Oh, I have this XML header here twice, I think. So let's get rid of that. Let's try again. This is one of those days where like there's like 10 different files and there's about 1,000 ways this can break. And so I'm like really hoping that this works before we're done because I want to have a nice demo for you guys. It didn't compile. What's wrong? Where's the compiler error? What's wrong? It says Android resource compilation failed XML not at start. Oh, I did it again here, didn't I? Okay. I selected the whole file and I copied and pasted over, and it copied and pasted over this heading that only can appear at the very start. So I think it made invalid stuff. I'm trying to walk you guys through all this because, you know, I want you to see some of the places it can break and how to fix them and how to find them and stuff. So did we get it running? Hey, okay, I got a Pokédex. I'm pretty sure if I click these it doesn't work. Let me check. Oh, it does. Okay, great. I didn't think it would work. Okay, fine. Well, what if it's in landscape mode? Does it still work? Hey, look at that. I've got a different layout now. You guys thought I was crazy, didn't you? What if I click on Bulbasaur? Okay, that's wrong, right? What that just did was wrong. It's not supposed to pop the... By the way, what is this? It's like the ghost of my old phone or something. Can I make it go away? Can I just drag this over it? There, it goes away. It's not supposed to make Bulbasaur fill the whole screen, right? It's not supposed to happen. It's supposed to change what I see over here on the right? So how do I do that? Well, it goes back to what I said a minute ago about, if else on the orientation. So let's at least do that real quick. So if you go to the Pokédex fragment, this part right here is if you click one of the buttons. I want to do this in portrait mode only. Jump to the other activity in portrait mode because they're separate from each other in portrait mode. So let's do that. Let's go to the slides. The thing about the orientation, if else, that's back a couple slides. It's here. If I'm in portrait mode, then jump to the details activity. Else landscape mode. And this doesn't understand what configuration is. I hit Alt-Enter to import configuration. There. Okay? So now, I don't have to rerun it, but I think now what would happen would be if I were in portrait mode, the button would jump to the details, but here in this mode, if I clicked, it would do nothing. I want to make it so clicking here updates this thing over here. How do I do that? Well, now I want two fragments to talk to each other, right? I want the Pokédex fragment to somehow send a message to the details fragment, right? Do you understand, like, saying start activity is wrong because they are not different activities from each other anymore. They're two fragments within one activity, right? So let's not do this. Let's have two fragments talk to each other. The way that you make fragments talk to each other is, to jump ahead back to where I was, where was I? Nope. I already did all this stuff. I did all this stuff. Here, if you want fragments that talk to each other, the way that they reach each other, I think somebody asked me this like last week or some previous lecture. They basically said, like, can you just like have the activities call methods of each other and stuff? And I kind of said, no, we don't do that. But with fragments, sometimes fragments do want to talk to each other. There is a variable or a global property that you have access to that's called your fragment manager. The fragment manager has a method inside called find fragment by ID, and if you pass the ID that you gave to the one fragment, then it will return that fragment to you as an object that you can talk to. So if the Pokédex fragment wants to talk to the details fragment, what you do is you go look at in the UI, in the landscape UI here. This is the details fragment. That's his ID, details underscore fragment. So back in the code here, you say fragment manager dot find fragment by ID r.id dot details fragment. That call is angry because it's it could be null. I'm just going to New York it and say, no, it's not null. I know it won't be. So you can say val details frag equals that. It doesn't know what type of fragment it is. It just says fragment question mark. And so if you want to talk to this thing, you probably want to refer to it as like a details fragment. You want to refer to it by the type that it really is. So you basically want to like typecast it into a details fragment rather than just a fragment. And so the way you do that is you say as details fragment. In Kotlin, the word as is a typecasting operation. Does that make sense? Like I want to go fetch that fragment and return it to me, and I want you to let me treat it as that type, so I know it's a detail fragment as opposed to a superclass like the general fragment superclass, okay? Now I can call any methods that I want on that. So I can say det frag dot whatever. Now, what methods can I call on it? Well, I mean any method that a fragment has, you could call, but here's the thing. I really want to emphasize to you, this is where like your normal programming knowledge kicks in. Any methods that I put over here in this details fragment, I could now call them over there in that other code. So if I write some function here called fun Marty is okay, whatever, You know, like if I have a Marty is okay function, then over here I can say, hey, details fragment, Marty is okay. So it's like they could talk to each other now. You can call whatever method you want, okay? Now what am I actually trying to do here? I'm trying to have it so that when you click, you know, this guy, like, is that Blastoise, or is it Blastiz? Tortiz, right? So is it Blastiz? How do you say that? Blastoise? That's stupid. That's dumb. Oh well, okay, whatever. So if I click on Blastoise, it should make him appear right here, right? Well, okay, so then how could I make it so that I send a message to the details fragment that says, hey, show Blastoise? Well, I have this parameter of like this Pokemon's name. I called it tag or whatever. So I could just do something like make a method where I pass in the tag and then show it to him. Now, currently, the way that the detail fragment knows which Pokemon to show is that in its intent, we pass the Pokemon's name as a parameter. But what if I want to be able to change a Pokemon's name later? This happens on creation. How do I change a Pokemon's name later than creation? You know what I mean? Like, how do I plug these pieces together? Like, what do I need to do here? I don't know if I'm making sense. Like, how do I make it so the one can send a message to the other one and tell him to change what Pokemon he's showing? Yeah?
Maybe make another function which takes in the parameter of the Pokemon name and then just use that code for that.
Yeah, that sounds great. You know, if you maybe the question is unclear, and maybe you guys are thinking the answer must be kind of tricky, involving indents and fragments and whatevers and stuff. But like, this is just a normal programming thing. Like, just make a function that takes a Pokemon's name as a parameter, like a string, and then shows that Pokemon, including his picture and his name and information about him. Just, you give me the Pokemon's name and I'll show him. And just make that be a function. And then have the one fragment call that function on me, and then I'll show him. Yeah, so like basically let's just yank most of this code out into a function. So here's where we get the Pokemon's name. Here is where we use it. So let's cut this, and let's call this like display Pokemon. And then you'll pass me the Pokemon's name as a string. Understand? And then here, when you load up the activity, that Pokemon's name is coming into me through an intent parameter. So I can just call display Pokemon with the Pokemon name that came in from my intent here. But now I have this function in case somebody ever wants to call it externally. So I could set the Pokemon on initialization, and I can set it later as well. So your suggestion is a great one. So now that I have this display Pokemon, over here in the fragment here where I'm trying to set this thing in the landscape mode, I'll say, hey, details fragment, please display the Pokemon that they want me to display, which is called, in this code it's called tag. So I'll just say tag. That's not a very descriptive name, so maybe I'll rename this to Pokemon name. Can I do that? Okay. That's it. So let's try it. Could this possibly work? Let me put it back in portrait mode for a second. It's compiling. So hopefully this if-else didn't break anything. If we're in portrait mode and I click on Blastoise, then I get him, her, it, whatever. Are these things gendered? Do they have? Are there girl Pokemon?
Yes.
Do Pokemon have babies? Do they like mate with each other?
It's not explored.
But do new Pokemons like appear in this? They have eggs. Okay, but they don't explain how the egg got. Do they mix? Is it like a mixture of the powers of two existing Pokemon? Or it's just like totally new?
It's complicated.
Does Ash like do it with them, and then they make like a human Poke hybrid or something? Ash is like a human guy, right? So my niece is like 10 or something, and she really likes Digimon. And I guess Digimon is like a shitty knockoff of Pokemon. And I don't understand, like, she doesn't like Pokemon, and I, like, tried to show her Pokemon, and she just doesn't think it's that cool. But she likes Digimon, and as far as I can tell, it's just uniformly worse than Pokemon. It's like a really cheap knockoff, but she loves it. I don't know. Anyway, okay, enough about that. So this in portrait mode seems to work. I can click on whoever, and I get the details. That's great. If I rotate it, I get my cool layout, and if I click on somebody, it didn't work. Wait, did I do have that setting. I do have the rotation turned on. Wait, what did I do wrong here?
Did you rerun it? Rebuild it?
Oh, did I not rerun the app? Okay, wait, let me make sure I'm running the newest code. Have you guys been bitten by that, where you made a change and it didn't do it? And let me try again. That was supposed to be the, like, ta-da moment there. Blew it. Okay, let's try. Ready? Okay. No, that's not fair. Why? Oh, wait. Oh, okay, it was. Okay. Yeah, I was right. I knew it. So it's running this. Okay, this is like very subtle and confusing, and I think I have enough time to fix this. So remember how I like hollowed out my activity code and I moved it over to be fragment code, right? Well, this is the original Pokédex activity with the list of all the Pokémons. And I moved its code over into the Pokédex fragment, but I didn't remove the code from here. Once you're done, the activity itself should mostly just be an empty husk that contains the fragments inside of it. But now that I removed the code, the thing is, I think it was running the onClick function from here and not the one in the fragment. And that's because if you go to the Pokédex fragment, see, I don't know if this will still work, because it says Pokemon click. See, it says cannot resolve symbol. So I was starting to say this earlier, but then it didn't seem to not work, and I got surprised by that. So this is the last little thing we have to change. In fact, I think, let me just try to run this. I don't think it'll run. Let me just make sure. Let me just confirm to myself that it doesn't work. I don't even know if it'll, okay, wait. Yeah, see, okay, it crashed, okay. Now what it'll say somewhere in here is like, I cannot find the method Pokemon click to call. It basically, it can't find this function. So now this is unfortunate. Now you remember how, when we do onClick, we usually put it in the XML here, right? When we listen to other kinds of events, like on a list view, how did we like tell it what to do on those events? Do you remember? It was different, right?
Like an adapter.
You had to like do it in the Kotlin code. You had to like say set listener and brackets and stuff like that. So unfortunately, the ability to set an onClick handler in XML only works in the most narrow of circumstances. It only works if it's in an activity. It doesn't work if it's in a fragment. It only works for onClick. It doesn't work for on anything else. So, I mean, the last thing we need to do here to really make this work is we need to remove all of these onClick attributes, which, right? We need to remove all of these. Isn't that ridiculous? Delete them all. And we need to attach the onClick handler in the Kotlin code. So in the Kotlin code here, when you create, or I guess it would be on activity created, in here we need to attach onClick listener to each image button. Now normally if we wanted to do that, you probably remember how we did it. We wrote the name of the widget, the ID of it, and then dot set listener and then brackets or something like that, right? But I don't just want to listen to one button. I want to listen to all of the buttons. So I kind of want to like loop over all the buttons and say for each button attach listener. So I'm going to kind of wave my hands a little bit here. The way to loop over all the buttons is to kind of basically loop over this layout. So what you do is you have your layout that the buttons are in, it's called table layout. So you say table layout, oops. This is a widget you can talk to. It has two properties or methods that you might want. It has child count. It has a child count property. So we're going to loop from 0 to length -1 for the children of this layout. So for each I in 0 to that -1. And then the table layout, the table layout is full of table rows, and then the table rows are full of image buttons. So it's like we have to say val row equals table layout dot get child at I as a table row. And then we have to loop over that table row to get all the buttons in it. So like for each j in 0 to table row dot child count -1. Inside of the table layout, there's a table row. Inside of the table row, there's a button. So val button equals row dot get child at j as image button. So this is like, you understand, like I'm looping over all the children of this, and each of them is one of these. And so now for each of these, I'm looping over all his children, and those are these buttons. So like I'm trying to loop over all the buttons and attach on-click handlers to them. So I can say button dot set on click listener to be a new lambda. And what do I want the lambda to do? I want it to call this function. So I just want to say Pokemon click. And what do I pass as the parameter? Well, a lambda that takes one parameter, like this one, is just called it. Pokemon click it. Click the button, basically. So I think this is one of the most weird parts of this code. But basically, this is like me patching the event handlers to still work. So let's give it a try. I think after that, hopefully, cross your fingers, this will work. And right in the nick of time, too, if so. Okay, you ready? Audible sigh of relief comes from the crowd. I would have made you stay after until 6 p.m. until we fixed it if it hadn't worked. So, look, I gotta say, that's all pretty complicated. I wish it were easier than this to do this. But this is pretty cool. It's pretty powerful to be able to do this. And I will say, once you've done this once or twice, it's not that bad. If you felt that this was hard to follow today, the video is going to be posted, all the files are going to be posted, and once you've done it, you will get used to it. It's not that bad after a while. So anyway, that's Fragments, that's landscape mode. No section this week. Tell your friends. I will see you Thursday. Thank you.